A building collapse in Kenya leads to much loss of life, and now a government response to take down buildings in Nairobi that officials say should never have been built.
The British Prime Minister caught in a moment of indiscretion regarding Nigeria. But were his comments true, false, or out of date?
And everyone has a secret they have long kept until one man started collecting them to show to the world. Africa 54 starts right now.
I'm Cynthia Are at Channels Television here in Lagos. Stay with us in the next half hour for news and stories from Nigeria and the world.
Well, and I'm Vincent McCory, Voice of America, coming to you from our global headquarters in Washington. Thanks for joining us.
Now, British Prime Minister Mr. David Cameron was in the news recently, calling Nigeria one of the most corrupt countries in the world at a Buckingham Palace reception for Queen Elizabeth. The Buhari administration calls the accusation an old snapshot of Nigeria. Here now to help us take a look at this picture and the administration's anti-corruption efforts so far is legal practitioner Mr. Wahab Shitu. Mr. Wahab Shitu, thank you so much for joining us on Africa 54.
Thank you, Cynthia, for inviting me.
I must begin by asking you what you thought about Prime Minister Cameron's comments, calling Nigeria and Afghanistan fantastically corrupt.
Well, let me start by saying that many Nigerians, particularly those who are obsessed with the theory of anti-corruption and integrity, will feel justifiably outraged, if not scandalized, at the British Prime Minister's commentary, because we all know that many Nigerians are not corrupt. But why would they feel scandalized? Because they felt, and some feel that their commentary was not diplomatic and also not politically expressed, given the long-standing relationship between Nigeria and Britain. But having said that, I think many will also agree that the comment is factually correct. And those who will be in this category will now begin to appreciate the reason why President Buhari made campaign against corruption one of the cardinal objectives of his campaign. Again, you have what the president said, that corruption is so endemic that if we do not kill corruption, corruption will kill Nigeria.
Yes.
In my view, I do not see anything different from the statement of British Prime Minister and what our own president acknowledged a long time ago. And this is because we must accept the bitter truth. In Nigeria today, there's general breakdown. Breakdown in systems, breakdown in institutions, breakdown in societal traditions, breakdown in ethical and moral values, breakdown in personal behavior. And the element to blame for this is corruption. And so, now that an outsider has now reminded us about this fact, I think rather than descend so harshly on him, on the British Prime Minister, we should rather descend on ourselves.
Well said. I think one of those efforts in changing that narrative was what we saw play out in London with the anti-corruption summit. In your view, did you appreciate the outcome of the summit? I
appreciate the outcome of the summit in that the summit made the point that made repatriation of loot one of the radical outcomes of the summit. And I'm very happy with the way our president responded. That what I need is not apology.
Something tangible.
I need something tangible. I want our assets recovered. Again, there are those who will also argue that Britain, the Prime Minister of Britain, does not have the moral standing to make such an assertion, given the fact that most of this loot,
yes,
are to be found in British, banks and some other areas. So, but I think I want to see it as a blessing in disguise.
But besides the stolen wealth that's been stashed there for a long time, what other efforts do we need to see domestically? Like you said, it's a joint effort. What can the average Nigerian do to help in the fight against corruption?
Well, the average Nigerian must realize that the change that the Buhari administration promised begins with you, begins with me. And that individually and collectively, all of us must enlist our support. Again, we need to change processes. We need to strengthen processes. We need to strengthen structures. We need to strengthen institutions. We need to strengthen societal traditions. We need to strengthen our personal behaviors, because there's no way you can fight corruption if all of this. So we need to embrace both preventive and proactive measures.
Well said.
Yes.
Legal practitioner Mr. Wahapshitu, thank you very much for joining us in Africa 54. We hope you join us sometime in the future.
It's always my pleasure to be on channels.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Now, it happened more than a week ago. A building collapsed in Nairobi. At least 51 people were killed and well over 100 people have been rescued from the ruins. Now, the government has begun demolishing the condemned buildings, and not many people are happy about that. Lenny Ruvaga reports from Nairobi.
Nearly 60 families prepared to spend the night in the cold after the government tore down 5 buildings in the Huruma section of Nairobi. 5 more are slated for demolition. Authorities say they were built improperly, some of them along a riverbank. Residents got 48 hours notice of the evictions.
People are moving out without knowing where they're going to live. Some have children like me. We will have to use what money we have to find other places to live or go back to our homes in the country.
This building in Huruma collapsed during heavy rains on April the 29th. About 150 families were living inside, even though the building had been declared unsafe 2 years ago. The tragedy sparked grief and outrage. And now, so have the demolitions.
My flat was legally built. We got the permit and documents to build it legally 20 years ago.
The government says many of the structures being torn down are illegal, erected haphazardly in low-income areas as the city expanded.
It was not allowed. So that's what I can say. That's why I'm calling it illegal. Who allowed it? There is there are no drawings, no title deed. Nobody has put his signature somewhere. So we say it was not allowed.
An audit ordered by the president last year found that 58% of buildings in the capital are unfit for habitation. Experts say builders are cutting corners and using substandard materials.
The developer thinks that if they follow the rule of law, then it will be costly for them in terms of paying the professionals and so on, and going through long approval processes. And then, in fact, again, we come to those who are meant to enforce the rule of law. They themselves are not enforcing. What you find is that there's quite a bit of corruption in terms of people being paid instead of following due processes.
In all, 226 buildings around Nairobi are scheduled for demolition. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi.
Now, there's a commemoration this month of the formation of the Organization of African Unity, now called the African Union. South Africa is marking the event with a symposium of the Africa World Heritage Fund, with over 70 people gathering to focus on heritage and development issues. Channels Television Johannesburg Bureau Chief Betty Dibia has more.
Present were heritage professionals, policymakers, academics, civil society, and community representatives to reflect on the past and future of Africa's world heritage.
We must pave the way for a new generation, as stated by the minister here this morning, of African professionals who can take ownership of their rich heritage.
But then again, there may not be a lot left to take ownership of soon, given various factors.
As we are trying to catch up with other regions of the world, as Africa, the destruction, the defacing of the heritage landscape in our country is not helpful at all.
We must work together to ensure that we get the poachers out of Africa. But also poachers will not be functioning if there's no market. And we should talk to the market, especially in Asia.
You can only love what you're exposed to. So it's up to us as broadcasters and part of the media to popularize this African thing, whether it's African identity, African history.
The activities of insurgents in the northeast part of the country has affected heritage in its tangible and intangible forms, particularly the World Heritage site of Sukur which is the first World Heritage Site for Nigeria and one of the 2 that Nigeria has.
Nigeria doesn't exactly score high points in preserving and developing its heritage sites. That, added to security concerns, must be extra worrisome. Africa is home to less than 10% of the globally recognized World Heritage Sites, but even the few here are still threatened by issues ranging from poaching to militancy, as well as a general disregard for history and its preservation. But those attending the seminar here believe that to move forward, it takes from the continental to community levels to make things right. From the cradle of humankind, Maropeng, South Africa, Betsy Dibia, Channels Television News.
Well, staying on the subject of development, British economist Partha Dasgupta, who received this year's Thailand Environmental Prize, says economists have something to learn from villagers in the developing world about sustainable growth. This year's Thailand laureate says economic and environmental issues are interwoven. Mike O'Sullivan reports for VOA.
Receiving the major environmental prize in a ceremony at the University of Southern California, the Indian-born Dasgupta was honored for his work in bridging the gap between economics and environmental studies. He says until recently, economists lacked the tools to grasp the complex natural world in which economic activity takes place.
The whole of development economics, concerned as it is with study of poverty and ways out of poverty in places in Africa, for example, or South Asia. It literally did not have the language to pick up the fact that economic development has to be in harmony with what nature provides.
Dasgupta has looked at how people born in the developing and industrial world have different prospects and has probed such questions as the role of poor nutrition in curbing productivity. He says subsistence farmers and villagers in many parts of the world have a wisdom learned from living on the edge of a harsh environment.
And so none of what I have written on would be news to the illiterate farmer in Zambia. But I think he would like to say that he's happy that I have tried to understand his life.
Dasgupta says analysts can learn about sustainable economics by collaborating with environmental scientists who see the toll taken on nature in both the industrial and developing worlds.
And if environmental scientists have taught us anything, it's to keep on telling us of the fragility of Earth, even though it's robust in some ways. But if you push it far, she reacts.
And he says the Earth is reacting, something which subsistence farmers from around the world know all too well. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, living with blindness in Africa or anywhere can be challenging. But for 2 young people, it's not a mountain too tall to climb. It's that story after the break.